So welcome, bienvenue everybody. Hopefully in the right Zoom meeting in the right place. And that name seems familiar. Who I'm letting in right now. Welcome to Voice of Diversity, number 4, episode 4. And my name is Mike Fan, and I'm the current PGSS Equity and Diversity Commissioner at McGill, representing EDI issues for graduate students at McGill. And I'm also a Master's of Opera and Voice performance student in the Faculty of Music. So when I'm not doing this, I'm making loud sounds in foreign languages. And today we're so excited to talk to Kevin Ah-Sen, who is here and here. And Kevin is an amazing educator and cellphilm creator, and we have so much to talk about, I'm sure, and I hope you're excited to learn more and to open the dialogue. So just a little snapshot of how it's going to work. So about the first hour or so, we're going to be talking to Kevin. Well, I will. Sometimes I'm split personality, but hopefully tonight I've got it under control. And then the last half an hour, we'll open up the floor, and I'll stop the recording, and we can have a little bit more of an anonymous Q&A. And of course, as with Zoom and this event, we want to make sure you feel comfortable. So if you want to leave your video off, use an alias, that's totally fine. If you want to show your video too, of course, we'd love to see your smiling faces and have you participate. If you have any questions or you have any things you'd like to bring up or talk about later, you can put it in the chat as well. You're welcome to use the chat as well too. And we're so happy to welcome you. So before I interview Kevin and introduce Kevin, I'm just going to read our land acknowledgement, because it's so important to honor this very important land that we have the privilege to reside on and to study on this land. Whether you're in Montreal or not, this land acknowledgement is for McGill and for Montreal. So we would like to begin by acknowledging that McGill University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relations with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Nous aimerions commencer par reconnaître que l'Université McGill est située en territoire autochtone, laquelle n'a jamais été cédée. Nous reconnaissons la nation Kanien'kehá:ka comme gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui. Tiohtià:ke, Montréal, est historiquement connu comme un lieu de rassemblement pour de nombreuses Premières Nations et aujourd'hui une population autochtone diversifiée, ainsi que d'autres peuples y résident. C'est dans le respect des liens avec le passé, le présent et l'avenir que nous reconnaissons les relations contenues entre les peuples autochtones et autres personnes de la communauté montréalaise. And I'm just going to put a link in the chat. It's native-land.ca. And if you're not in Montreal or Tiohtià:ke, you can look up the land acknowledgement for where you are currently. And I should mention as well, I think I may have mentioned that the event is being recorded the first hour or so. And so usually with our cloud recording, it'll only be me and Kevin. And then afterwards, I'll pause it while we have our more laissez-faire conversation. And so just FYI, and we try to keep the participants here anonymous, so hopefully that helps to create a safe space for you. And eventually I'm hoping that the interview portions I'll have time to put on YouTube, because I've had a lot of requests for people who can come in person to listen to the interviews and to enjoy them. And I think there's some really amazing conversations that have been happening. So we're really excited to kind of hopefully have that happen also. So let me introduce our wonderful guest. And we have an amazing clip, which we'll show you as well. Also, before we finally get to talk to Kevin, Kevin's probably sitting there like, ah. Well, here's the super fun part where you get to sit and I get to say wonderful things about you. So Kevin, welcome everyone else who is joining us as well also. Who I didn't get to greet personally. So Kevin Ah-Sen is an educator and a PhD student in human development in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology at McGill University. Super exciting, as this is actually our first guest currently at McGill also. Our other guests have been from all other sorts of places. His research interests broadly cover youth development and school pushout. He seeks to draw attention to the impacts of racialization on youth, specifically lived consequences, by identifying and tracing harmful educational practices and policies. He is also passionate about critical race and social justice approaches to research and critical pedagogy, or pedagogy if you're from the States. He holds a Master's of Education in Educational Psychology, where he explored identity development among East Asian Canadian university students through an intersectional lens, looking closely at issues of race, gender, and the model minority construct. Prior to pursuing his doctoral studies, Kevin was a secondary school English teacher and choir director. And I also post this in the chat, so if that helps make it more accessible for you. Yes! I see some applause happening, virtual applause, absolutely. So welcome, Kevin. And one of the things that brought Kevin and I together were we both had entries in the International Cellphilm Festival, and Kevin and I believe this is Alexa. This is the right Alexa, right? We're co-creators for this, and welcome also. We're so excited to have you here. This is really exciting. So it would be amazing to hear your thoughts also in this process. But these two wonderful humans created an amazing cellphilm called IMPERI, which took the first prize at this festival, which was super exciting. And just to give you some context, I thought it would be a nice introduction to our conversation today and to Kevin to play this cellphilm, which they created and so generously given permission for us to play this today. So here we go, and hopefully you can give me a thumbs up that it is working. You can see it, you can hear it. Zoom is a fun time sometimes. Here we go.
In Chinese, yellow sounds like king. Honor as one stands connecting the three horizons, heaven, man, and earth. But to you, my yellow is sick. My yellow crawls, creeps, and kills. My yellow, bleached, disinfected, metaphorically, and to a certain extent, literally. I was once told that I didn't belong, but now I'm told to not exist. On an unceded land, the only place I know as home, now empty. 6 feet apart, it keeps us safe, they say, you say. But little did I know, your distance was kept by your disgust. Even from a distance, you make me feel closer to nothing. Should I keep walking? Why did I leave the apartment in the first place? Here I sit in the dark, where I feel safe and seen. Yellow sparks flicker across the globe, like broken lights or signalings of danger. I stare at the void where humanity once resided, and worry for the lights who have shone and lit our paths, and for the baby bulbs who are still unaware of their worth and brightness. In darkness, I am afraid of the virus, but in light, I am more afraid of you.
So powerful, amazing, wonderful, fantastic. Yes, give it up for Kevin and also Alexa for their very powerful cellphilm. And finally, last but not least, bienvenue, welcome Kevin. Great to see you. Bonsoir.
Thank you. Thank you for the generous and kind introduction. And also want to shout out to PGSS and everybody else who is behind the scenes organizing these events. I know these are very tough times, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to share this space with all of you, and also the labor that was put behind all of this as well. And also shout out to Alice, if I'm not mistaken, who created these graphics so to make me look so nice on posters and on social media. So thank you, Alice, for that.
Yes, I'm currently using Alice's Zoom account, so thanks to Alice. And yeah, it takes a village always, audience here and the PGSS team. Alice is wonderful. She's one of the ones for PGSS who designs the graphics and sets up the registration. She does a lot of the work for these events. So yes, and thank you for starting us off in such difficult times with such gratitude, and it's absolutely my pleasure. And I'm so glad Alexa's here as well. Also, and when I saw your cell phone, I believe it was in May, I was very struck by it, and I think it's a conversation that really needed to happen, and there were issues that were um, were brought about in the cell phone, which are so resonant. And yes, and thank you. And I mean, yes, there are I always choose the wrong side. Yes, there are graphics, but the beauty is only representative of the beauty that's already there. So wonderful. Yes, it's so great to talk with you and to share your story and share more about you with our Zoom audience today. So, having just seen this cell film, there's so much to unpack. It's such a powerful piece, and maybe if you want to start us off by just telling our Zoom audience what a cell film is, in case they're not as familiar, because I didn't know until this year actually. Um, and maybe how you came to hear about cell phones and the cell phone festival.
Sure. Actually, prior to the um, the Cell Film Festival, I didn't know about it either. I didn't know what it was. But Alexa, who is my collaborator and longtime friend, also fellow PhD student, superstar, actually, sorry, PhD candidate. Um, so she introduced me to the festival. Actually, she came across it, I think, through this kind of, I think, McGill emails and whatnot and social media. And I'm kind of lost in the timeline, but we were having a conversation during, I think it was end of March, beginning of April, when um, the anti-Asian racism and anti-Asian xenophobia was quite tense. And
Mm.
I was going through a very tough time just kind of processing those feelings and processing the events that were happening at the time, globally and also very locally. And so in conversation, and maybe we could talk more about that later, but in conversation with Alexa, she kind of brought that up. And I thought that it would be an interesting kind of avenue for me and for us together to explore something collaboratively, because I've always wanted to work with her. And so to kind of bring that together and to potentially explore those feelings through a creative art form. So Cell Films is it's actually known as well, in its name, cell phone and film. So it's kind of like a play on word. So it's using your cell phone to create to create a film, a short film. And the idea behind it actually is more of a research methodology, an art-based research methodology. Um, I haven't really delved into the nitty-gritty of the literature, but um, it's used as a participatory visual methodology in which um, we used to kind of explore notions of injustice and lived experiences through an art form and through an art-based inquiry. And so, not to get too technical with research terminology, but it, that's that's what it is in a nutshell. And yeah, so it was introduced through the Institute of Human Development and Wellbeing at McGill University. And I believe the Cell Film Festival, the one that we participated in, was the eighth edition or their eighth like annual festival or spring festival. So it's relatively new and relatively fresh in terms of just gathering people together to create and to share and to create opportunities for dialogue. And so that's what it is. I don't know if I answered your questions, all of them.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Just to give some context for this, I think the name is very well chosen because I think it really encapsulates what it is being created on a cell film and filmed the portmanteau. So, and it was really amazing because being there and screening all of them and looking at the literature and the research into this, it's really fascinating, and and especially in such times when there's so many issues of accessibility and related issues, whether it's financial or related to technology equipment. It's such a great way to get folks involved in a creative process from home and from their own experiences. It makes it more personal. And I love that the winners of this festival, especially this year, but I think in general, as you said, highlight social justice issues and issues that need to be shared and discussed. And in particular, so kind of speaking of which, you had mentioned, I think it's very clear from the cell phone that this cell phone that you both created talks about the racism and the issues faced by Asian diaspora, Asian Canadian, Asian American uh, folks in particular, people in particular, during this pandemic. In case you're not aware, there's this little COVID-19 pandemic going on right now, and yeah, it's been an interesting time. And as you were mentioning, there were lots of feelings and lots of issues that came about, and it's great that you found this creative outlet to express this in. So could you talk a little bit about, yeah, how it's been affecting communities outside China, which was the origin of this virus. And I mean that's also in itself, you know, in terms of Trump calling the Chinese flu, and even within Asia itself, it's an issue, but also in diaspora throughout. Even I have friends in Europe who are of Asian descent, not even Chinese descent. There has been a lot happening. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences during this pandemic and how that's kind of really hit home for you.
Absolutely. I think it's important to also acknowledge the fact that, you know, anti-Asian racism is not new, especially in settler colonial states, right? In terms of the history behind um, uh, Asian settlers in North America specifically, and throughout the timeline, there's been instances of very heightened hatred and violence towards Asian peoples, and oftentimes that is kind of highlighted through actual pandemics and epidemics. So, tracing back to SARS and also H1N1. So there's all these instances where Asian people have been the scapegoat for a lot of that kind of dialogue, and has become and the fact that, you know, people would use these kind of opportunities to then express and justify and legitimize their violence towards Asian people. Um, the idea is that, well, obviously you've mentioned Trump, and I don't want to talk about him, but one thing
It's
is,
an hour in itself.
yeah, I think that pretty much.
Hopefully we're over that chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
Giving,
Um,
giving.
Obviously that didn't help, but in terms of how the Asian diaspora, and I would, and also I also wanted to kind of clarify, and also for the audience tonight also to understand that, to keep in mind that Asian doesn't encompass
Mhm.
everyone. Um,
Yeah.
there's a diverse Asian ethnic uh, there's an ethnic diversity within the Asian umbrella. And so with this particular instance of the COVID-19 pandemic, it really struck um, hard towards people who look like me. So it could be East Asians or Southeast Asians. Um, and I mean, for in my personal experience, I mean, obviously there are moments where I feel a bit more kind of like when I leave home, I have to equip myself and just kind of prepare for the worst. And there are days where I just don't have that energy to confront that in reality. So for me, it was kind of interesting to see. Now I could say that, but at the time it wasn't interesting. Now it's interesting to kind of understand the dynamics in terms of you know, how within our community, specifically in response to those to racism and to discrimination and to hatred and to violence, but also to kind of analyze and see and react to how other communities and other marginalized communities um, react in response to that as well. And I've noticed that there is an interesting dynamic in terms of just how, we're not, I mean, for my own community, we don't necessarily speak. So it's
Mm,
actually very difficult to actually engage in conversation with people, and to create coalition and to create solidarity amongst communities. Um, but to answer your question more specifically, during this time, Asian communities have become, or Chinese communities specifically, have become the target um, of hate in relation to COVID-19 specifically, and people have been experiencing psychological violence and physical violence. Um, I have family in Australia, and there are reports out there that certain neighborhoods that are predominantly Asian have been victims of vandalization and physical abuse and violence. And so, I think about my grandparents who live in Clayton, Victoria, and in Melbourne, and they're both over 90 years old, and I worry all the time about their safety and their well-being. Also keeping in mind that they are of a generation doesn't doesn't speak the language, so they kind of just go about their days without really um, engaging with the Australian English-speaking community. Um,
yes.
and then here as well, in Canada, we have a wide range of instances that have not been reported, and that have only been circulating throughout Asian social media, so specifically Chinese social media. And so there's very little coverage and very little attention to um, the cases and the harm that's being done to Asian people and Asian communities. And to me, that's quite concerning. Um,
Yes.
yeah, but I kind of went on a tangent. I forgot what the question was.
No, no worries. And part of this is it's not like not a pop quiz or anything. It's like, Kevin, answer these five questions perfectly. But no, part of this is just really just to really open up the floor for conversation, discussion, and
Yeah,
food for thought. And so much of what you mentioned, yes, absolutely. And I've experienced as well similar feelings, both for myself or family members, and generally for the community. And that's part of why I was really I was so happy to see your cell film, even though obviously it's a heavy subject, but it was so exciting for me to see it represented and in a creative way. And I really wanted to, and since I have this platform, really wanted to bring you in and to represent someone who looks like us, the Asian American, Asian Canadian experience, because I think it is not talked about enough. And what you said was so right, is that a lot of people are becoming aware of racism. Obviously, I mean, there has been awareness, but I think there's a certain awareness now that is so much deeper and so much more profound in this year that has really come about. And but I think with a lot of people who have not who come from a place of certain privilege, there there is kind of a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness, and a kind of feeling that, oh, this is new, or why are people starting to talk about these things, or but it's not like it's new. It's been going on for years, for centuries. And as long as people were able to first see differences in each other and to start judging each other for it, which is tale as old as time. But yeah, absolutely, it's something that has happened, and I think it's just magnified now. So many things have been just magnified in terms of injustices, but in particular for racism. And I love what you discussed, because I think one of the challenges with being Asian American is that there is this kind of difficulty in finding the solidarity. And of course, as you said, Asians are not all homogenous. There's many different cultures, countries, languages, cultural norms, traditions, and that's part of why perhaps it's difficult to find this kind of cohesion. And even within the Chinese Canadian community, there's so much diversity across the backgrounds depending on what region of China people come from. Such a big country with such a big population, but definitely, I mean, if we look at media, if we look at so many of the conversations being had, Asian Americans are being left so much out of the equation. I should say North Americans because I think for us Canadians, we're always very conscious of using the word American to refer to us as well. But yeah, absolutely, tangents are very much encouraged, and I think also there's not always a space for us to talk about it, and so much of it is always in our head, and it's like where do I get a chance to talk about this and to raise an awareness about our experience? And I think so. I'm really happy that we're able to talk about this and to delve deeper. And so for you, having grown up in Canada but coming from a Chinese background, could you talk about this experience of being, I guess, your second generation?
Mhm.
Yeah, same. So I certainly have my experiences. So, it's an interesting, but it's also challenging kind of dual identity. So, and I'm sure there's many others that relate to this, having multiple, not even just two different identities to kind of grapple with. For me, for example, I also have my queer identity as well as just kind of like a third party, and being a musician, being an artist, that's kind of another minority in its own way in certain regards too. But how's your kind of multiple identity kind of played into your experience in Canada, and especially I'm interested to know in Quebec as well too, because I moved to Quebec last year, and I was quite new to this province, and in this year it's been quite different from my experience, for example, in Ontario where I lived before. So I'm really interested to know your experiences with this kind of, yeah, very very interesting dynamic going on.
Thank you for that question. It's a very loaded one, given the history. So I was born in Ontario, but moved around when I was a kid. To spare you the details, moved across the country and then came to Montreal at the age of 6. So I normally just tell people that I'm from here. And pretty much I say that because also um, my memory kind of just was locked in from my time in Montreal. So my memory is, in terms of like my BC memories or Ontario memories, are very vague and very faded. So um, I would say that what's interesting is that also my dad is from, although Chinese, is from Mauritius. So there's also for me that kind of Mauritian identity that comes into play. And also given that my last name is not traditionally Chinese, it kind of puts me in very awkward situations sometimes. Now that I find them hilarious now, but at the time they were quite hostile. um, so I've had some interesting moments where, growing up, just trying to even fit in with the Asian community where I lived. Because so where I lived specifically, where I grew up in Quebec, it's a small, not a small town, but it's a suburb actually outside of Montreal named Brossard. And it's now it's now known as a very Asian suburb, or very Chinese suburb specifically. And so I grew up with a lot of um, Chinese folks around me, and so in terms of just kind of connecting with them has not been a very difficult experience. The only time that I did find maybe challenging was kind of I felt that there were times where it was with non-Chinese folks that I had to kind of negotiate. So they're like, "Oh my gosh, SM, like, where does that come from?" And I'm like, I have to give them a whole, biography explaining that, my father's from here, but he's from China originally, or my grandparents are from China, and specifically Hakka nomads who are from the north and then traveled to the south. And so there's all of this kind of history lesson that comes into play whenever I have to explain my, I guess, genealogy, or just in terms of my cultural background. And I think for a lot of Chinese people, I could only, speak to my own experience, but I think through conversation with a lot of my friends and also other Asian folks who are second gen, right? I think a common question growing up would always be, where are you from? And then where are you really from? But like, where are
Really
you
from,
really,
yeah.
really from? Um, So there's kind of all of this, there is this constant negotiation of like just legitimizing my identity and my story. So there's that. And then there's also, in terms of kind of navigating in different spaces, I would say, um, in school as well, like, growing up in the suburbs that it's predominantly French speaking, um, there was, it was very interesting now that I think about it in terms of just like how I was treated, but not in a sense that like, I was treated badly, but in terms of just how people interacted with me and with the Asian students specifically. And there's always this kind of um, distancing between, um, maybe not distancing, but there's this kind of there's no willingness to kind of really understand and to connect with us. So in
Yes.
terms of being seen and being treated as foreigners, constantly being treated as foreigners, that has
Yes.
always been a very that has always been bothering. That has always bothered me growing up. Because it was always assumed that I was an immigrant, or it was always assumed that uh, that I didn't speak French, for instance, right? I would go to a store and they would automatically speak to me in English, or I would go to a store and, um, you know, they would slow down the explanation and to make sure that I understood what they were saying. But I've never had an issue with language, either in French or in English. Or when I do
Yes.
speak in French, I would get comments like, wow, you speak really, really good French, or you don't have an accent, um, or like, how long have you been speaking French? Or there's all of these questions where it would naturally situate me in an immigrant, within an immigrant profile. Um, and I guess growing up with that kind of experience, I could honestly say that it made me really dislike being Asian. It really made me dislike being Chinese specifically, which I had to then grapple and reconcile with growing up in terms of just finding um, confidence and also pride. So I had moments where I would tell people like, no, I'm not Chinese, I'm Mauritian, right? And then that would
Mm,
kind of like,
right.
split and separate me. Although that is true, I mean, the history behind Mauritius, it's a diaspora country, right? It's also a colonized country. So there are Asians, both South Asians and East Asians and Africans, and so there's a wide mix of people. But it would always be my go-to whenever I wanted to kind of draw the line between me and to other myself, uh, to really honestly say. And then I would say now in my adult life, there will be instances where I will go to job interviews, and as a teacher, all of my teacher interviews have been what number one, it would always be, what was your hardest or most difficult experience, assuming that I would be talking about my Asianness and my immigrant background. um, but I've had an interview, my very first teacher interview. They asked me whether or not I had any interest in going back to my country and teach, and that really shocked me in terms of, I didn't expect that. Although I knew that things like this would happen, I didn't really expect it to happen to me. Um, uh, or even sometimes people, when they see my name, they don't expect an Asian face. And so
Mm,
in that same interview, when the principal came out, she came out and then she saw me, and then she literally had like a shocking expression, like, oh, did I
a
get,
reaction.
yeah, like, is this like, is this the right person? Am I talking to did I get my schedule wrong? So there were all these kind of like, um, instances where now I would really laugh about it, but at the time I was kind of, taken aback. Or there was even, an interview where I had to, because as an English teacher, um, um, because I was an English teacher, I should say, they wanted to make sure that I spoke English properly
Mm-hmm.
and that I didn't have an accent. And so they had to bring someone from the English department and sit them down with me to have a conversation to kind of like, just to prove that I could speak um, properly, or I didn't have an Asian accent. And so, I mean, obviously, I would not contest that in those specific moments, but these are things that we experience, or people like me experience in different settings, where we have to kind of always fight the system, and always trying to
Yeah.
legitimize our presence and our belonging and um, our existence, really. And still today, as a graduate student, and even after quitting my teaching job and going to doctoral studies full time, there are still instances where I grapple with those issues, right? But now I do have the vocabulary to kind of address those scenarios and people
Yes.
that cause those problems. So
Excellent.
yeah, yeah, I think that's in a nutshell. That's me here in
That's
Quebec.
amazing. And I'm glad to hear that too, because it does take this sign of kind of eventually having this moment, and for me as well, kind of flipping that switch to kind of, um, kind of just taking it and just kind of being very passive in that kind of role, and to really saying, no, I'm not going to stand for this. And in fact, actually for you as well, you're in roles where, as an educator and in graduate studies of taking on more of a leadership role. And yeah, I empathize and I understand, and I see myself so much in what you shared, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and your openness to share these experiences, because it's not easy to talk about, and I personally don't feel it's talked about enough, because I so agree. It's kind of like living in this middle weird no man's land um, where we kind of don't really get seen by society. Or when we talk about race, and it's great that it's being talked about, and especially this year, even if it came out of such difficult scenarios. But where are the Asian Americans in so much of these experiences? And in media, so much I see. Even today, like things being produced in 2020, I turn on Netflix or I watch TVs or commercials, and Asians are still portrayed in very discriminatory ways, in very limited ways, with stories that are not nuanced and that don't describe these experiences. They're not talked about, they're not discussed, and they're very valid. And we had very different experiences growing up in different regions of Canada, and I grew up a little bit in the States too, and yet so many of our experiences are so similar. And I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but for me, part of it is sort of the uh, I guess sort of the immigrant mentality, or maybe perhaps a cultural tying over from the parents or community of, oh, let's not talk about this, let's not rock the boat, let's just be successful, be happy in our own lives. This is something I experienced, at least. And then so how for you did you really find that strength and that confidence to say, well, I'm I'm going to be more active and more kind of involved and more of a leader, rather than sort of kind of being dealt these experiences and then kind of saying, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't say anything, or maybe I should just, you know, um, I'd love to know more about that. In particular, in relation to, you've done such great work in terms of racialization, and in particular in East Asian Canadian, um, in studying East Asian Canadian student demographics. I feel like these experiences that you've used them in such a positive way in your line of work and in your career path and studies and academic path. So I'm just really curious to know how that kind of, you were able to turn that into something positive and something that could really move things forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's also a very heavy question. I was having this conversation with my mother recently in terms of just like, when did I become so vocal? Or,
Yeah, my mom thinks I'm a freak, you
yeah,
know.
and I haven't always been that way. And I think there are instances in my life that have prompted action. So kind of taking all of you to a very fragile time in my childhood. In elementary school, there was an instance specifically, I think that pretty much triggered a lot of things. And so, um, and that also kind of comes with a lot of baggage in terms of experiencing discrimination and racism, subtle racism from child peers, um, where they would call me names, or they would pull their eyes back and make fun of my food, or whatever, imitate Asian languages and whatnot. And these, I've kind of normalized those experiences growing up because I thought it was normal. I thought
Yes.
these were things that were funny. And also these were depictions and illustrations and representations that we got in media, right? Even though very scarce,
Reinforced.
yeah, even
Yes.
though very scarce, like you said earlier, these were representations that were prominent in terms of what we were exposed to. So, the Asian sidekick, that was funny, bucktooth, blah, 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 with the accent, always an immigrant character. And the very few, people that we could look up to were Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and they were all, martial artists. And so these were all other stereotypes that also I could not identify with, but yet I also found a lot of pride in it.
Yes.
Um, so in elementary school, there was a time where it was during recess, and we were just playing around. We were a small group of Asian kids, and it was during a cold winter's day, and somebody on the gym wall had, so it was a wall that was close to the gym entrance, so it was outside on a brick wall, had very innovatively used snow to kind of sculpt a very large phallic imagery. And so it was kind of like, it was impressive. I remember seeing it, and I was like, wow, how did you reach up there? We were all so short. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then I think I know who did it, and I know who did it. And so they ran off, and then somehow we were very close in proximity to that sculpture. And a substitute teacher came over, and he was kind of like monitoring the recess. And he was like, oh, why did you do this? And I was like, I didn't do it. So talking to my friends and me. And so we were suddenly accused of for vandalizing the school wall with a penis, a snow penis. And this was, I think this debacle held up for a week or so, and we were punished, and we were told to go home and copy on both sided, I will never do it again. And I was very, very angry at the time, and all of my friends were like, sure, we'll do it, and then I'll shut them up. But I was very, very angry and upset because I hated being accused of doing something that I didn't do. I think this was the very first time that I was being accused so harshly. And while walking home, because we all lived around the neighborhood, while walking home, I told my friends, I was like, we're not doing this. We're not going to write it. Like, oh, we're going to get in trouble. We're going to get detention. And so then I said, do whatever you want to do. I'm going to, stand up for all of us the next day. I didn't know what I was going to do. So when I got home, I told my parents, and my parents told me to just do whatever he told you to do. So I did. I wrote, I didn't do it, instead of I did it, or I'll never do it again. So I actually did the assignment by just copying I never did it, or I didn't do it. I don't remember what I wrote, but it was to protest. So it was my very first kind of like standing up for myself moment at the tender age of 10. And I went to school early. I went straight to the principal's office, and then I confronted the principal saying that this is what happened to me yesterday. This is the assignment. I don't want to see the substitute teacher. And I don't remember how that resolved, but it resolved. But this was not something, or this was not the type of attitude that I kind of carried out throughout my life as well. And as a lot of teenagers kind of go through, our confidence shatters throughout time. And so I haven't really gotten the confidence nor the oomph to really kind of stand up for myself. But as I grew older, I really do, I acknowledge that there's a lot of wonderful people in my life that have taught me to 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 stand up for myself, and also giving me the confidence to do so. Um, and also and now as a baby scholar, in terms of trying to figure that out through academia, I rely a lot on the works of Black and Indigenous feminist scholars that have done so much of the groundwork to remind us of our roles and our place, and how we should engage in this type of work. um, but my friends and I've been very fortunate to have such wonderful women in my life, my mother, my aunt, and although they haven't gone to school at a young age, I mean that they all had to drop out at a certain time. It was a very, very rough time in China. But in terms of um, learning how to respect not only other people but ourselves as well, they've taught me in abundance. I've had wonderful, friends who have taught me to embrace and love who I am. So that has also given me that confidence to also take on this type of work, also take on this civic duty to do what I can within my own capacities to make things right and make things just, or to give a fair chance for others to do the same. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm still learning. I'm still learning. There are still moments where I uh, am extremely nervous about doing social justice work or
Yes.
attempting to do social justice work. Even in the process of making the cell film, to talk about my story and experiences, in terms of just sharing that poem was very difficult in terms of just, should I put myself out there like that, and what would the reactions be if I do. um, so so yeah, I would say I'm still learning, and I'm still um, in the process of finding myself, and also in deep reflection, um, with wise words of wonderful people, whether they're immediate family, chosen family, the scholarships of wonderful scholars out there. I've definitely taken this time, especially in isolation, to soak in all of that and to reflect on those things as well. Yeah.
Yes, that's amazing. And we had a positive reaction from someone saying, "Thank goodness for support from our communities in the chat." And and we're so glad. I'm sure I can speak for myself that this cell phone did happen, that both of you had the courage to put it out there during a very sensitive and complex time. But it's a story that needed to be heard, and this conversation tonight, with your openness and your willingness to share so honestly and openly, it's just, it really opens a door for us to support each other of all walks and faiths and all sorts of things that seem to separate us and make us different. But really, we really realize, how much we need to support each other and how important that is. And part of why I love this series, we're creating these spaces where we can support each other and support marginalized identities, and definitely the East Asian North American experience is one that is, yeah, tricky to navigate for a lot of different reasons. And you highlighted so many of those issues very beautifully. But then it's really inspiring also to hear how you've taken that and really um, marched forward with such confidence and such strength and such vision for in your life and in your work. And it's very exciting to see. And even though you say sometimes you're nervous and all of that, same. It's, that's great that you say that, because if it was easy, then it'd be a lot easier to do. But the fact that it's difficult, that it can make you nervous, is a sign that it's something difficult, but it's also worthwhile.
Yeah, I think
And
so, for example, in many of these projects, I mean, some of these people are here, and these wonderful women in my
yeah,
life are
speaking of support.
here, right? Like Amanda, Alexa, Cora, Molly. These are all good friends of mine uh, who are intelligent and talented in so many ways and beautiful in and out, who have inspired me personally to engage in discourse about justice, about fairness, and about life and ethics in general. But also, they've been not only an emotional support, but also a soundboard for a lot of my ideas as well. And in conversation with them has always enlightened me and given me that kind of in very doubtful moments. I've always been able to kind of leave that conversation or hang up our phone chat with a breath of relief and a bit more confidence to move forward. So a little shout out to my girls.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, I have my own. I love my family and as well, but I have my chosen family, let's say, also, and that is so important and to nourish us and to kind of support us as well too. But also, I wanted to also celebrate you being a fellow Chinese Canadian, also because at McGill, when I came here, I suddenly realized, especially I think in across the board, we're having a lot of discussions about that. But for example, the music faculty as well, I was, it was yeah, it does something to you when you look around and there's not many people that look like you, and I think that's important also too. But I'm also so grateful to people because I have friends from all sorts of different uh, you know backgrounds, and it's beautiful having this kind of fabric where we like really see each other, and we're able to support each other and kind of celebrate those diverse elements with each other. And yeah, because then I've also experienced that thing too, where then all the growing up, all the Asian kids wanted to hang out together too, and at the same time, it's wonderful to have that too. But it's also great to be able to have a friend circle that reflects, especially in Canada, this beautiful diversity and this cultural mosaic we have. But it's so important because that support, it really means a lot, especially having experienced things that you've shared and that I've also experienced too, where we've had a really hard time finding our identity and being happy and secure with that and being confident in it. So that's beautiful that you celebrated all that support. I also wanted to say something as well too, that it was really interesting that you mentioned your connection to Mauritius. I think Charlotte in particular remembers last month we were talking with Kamala Mackerel for Voice of Diversity, and we also read their recent poetry release as well too, Zomfemme, and Kama is a trans black femme Mauritian Canadian from Indian descent, and so it was really really interesting to also hear your experiences from a little bit of the Mauritius connection too, which is super fascinating. And I would love to also know sort of in terms of your work, your study at McGill, um, what you're accomplishing and what you're studying in terms of, especially with East Asian Canadian communities and students and racialization. What are the kind of positive things that you would like to kind of accomplish, I guess, at McGill and also as you move beyond and continue to light up the world.
Yeah,
No
thanks.
pressure.
Um, I hope to be able to light up the world.
You
uh,
already are, so
Thank
I've no doubt it will happen.
you.
Keep
Um,
happening.
there's a lot of I'm very inspired now to really look into a lot of things. My work specifically in my doctoral studies is not specifically towards or looking into Asian experiences, but I always keep that at the behind at the back burner. So the type of work that I uh, would like to engage in my doctoral studies and research is to address issues of social justice, to look into Black and Indigenous and other racialized youths' understanding and definition of what justice is, and how in spaces like schools, um, in social and physical spaces like schools, how they experience that. And most importantly, one of the research questions that I do want to kind of explore and really kind of get into is how do young people, BIPOC youth specifically, reimagine what those spaces are within a just and fair um, perspective. So what that just and fair space looks like to them. And so that would require an engagement of a participatory action research. And I'm still, thinking whether or not I would use cellphilm, for example, as a mode of inquiry,
Mm,
as a method
yes.
to maybe illustrate those understandings and thoughts and reflections that might not be possible through words, but maybe through
Mhm.
imagery and through artful expression. Um, so that's still something that I yet have to maybe not decide, but to think about a bit more carefully. But um, but the idea of justice and is still a huge proponent of the work that I want to do. Um, and that is also inspired by my experiences as a teacher working with adolescents and youth, where in moments of honesty they've shared a lot of dissatisfaction and grief in terms of their experiences with injustice, whether or not it's racially charged, or in terms of their sexuality, or in terms of social class and whatnot. So there are all these moments where I felt so powerless because there was only so much I could do as a teacher, and in terms of also confidentiality, to not be able to kind of act upon those scenarios and situations. But also the fact that I was able to be there for them really was something that I still kind of hold dear to my heart, and I still have these relations with them today, even though this is many years later. And so I understand what it's the importance of safe spaces, right? And safe spaces not as physical spaces, but more social spaces. And so I want to be able to do that kind of work with young people uh, in the pursuit of my doctoral studies, and to really keep in mind that it's not doing research on them, but rather with them, so that
Mm,
it's a level playing field where I'm learning as much as they're learning from me. And I think in terms of as educators, we oftentimes forget that kind of dynamic, where it's
yes.
we naturally position ourselves in a power within the power dynamics of the authority figure versus it's their pupils. But in all honesty, I mean, maybe because I started young, uh, there was a lot of similarities in terms of maybe our interest and in terms of um, the popular culture that we're all engaged with. I feel like now I'm getting a little older and slightly more detached from that reality. But in terms of conversations and in terms of just, simple curiosity, I think I've worked really hard to be mindful of that, and to create opportunities and time for critical discussions about life, whether or not I have the answers to them or not. um, but also to encourage young people to engage in those conversations. So yeah, that's pretty much how my research, or at least my research interest, how that kind of was formulated. It was really experiential and anecdotal, and very dear to my heart. So unlike a lot of researchers out there, I take a lot of this very personally. So I do.
Yes.
I'm still struggling with kind of detaching myself sometimes, because
Right.
I get very attached to the work that I do and to the people that I work with. So yeah.
Oh, but that's wonderful. And I mean, grad students and researchers in particular are usually quite passionate about their work, but I love that your work really ties into a broader social awareness and related to social justice, and that the passion you have for this vision of the future is very, very easy to perceive, and it's beautiful that it's tying all together, and also possibly with cell phone also too, and bringing all these threads together. And it's wonderful to know that you're here at McGill and doing this wonderful work, and it's been and wonderful talking to you about it all. And we're gonna move to questions very shortly, but it's been so wonderful to hear your story, and for you to be able to share so honestly and so openly with our audience tonight, and just being this emblem of what it means to really have a diverse identity, but then also to really create positive change in the world, and really to let that beautiful, wonderful, unique voice that you have really propel you forward, and to kind of create those spaces, and this more of this world that we want to be a part of. So that's fantastic. So do you mind if I share your socials in the chat?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Nothing
Well,
interesting, but sure.
yeah. Well, if you would like, Kevin's socials are here, and thank you. We have someone in the chat saying thank you so much for this insightful conversation. That they learn so much from Kevin each time they hear about his work and lived experience, and the ways in which it informs what he does, and has to jump on another call. But yes, you're welcome, and
Bye,
thank you.
Cora.
Absolutely. Bye. It was so great to meet you. And this is all so wonderful. And so I invite you to also stay in touch on social media with PGSS Equity Team, and also with PGSS McGill. And there's the beautiful thing on the Insta. I'm not sure if that's in reference to me, but we like to share other things too. But yes, and our next event we're really excited is, I think, very related to what Kevin has been talking about, is the Equity and Allyship Book Club, which is also happening every month. The next one is November 19th, 2020, this year, of course, 3 p.m., 15, Kanza. It's got my languages mixed up. So that's happening next Thursday, and we hope to see you. And you can always email me, equity.pgss@mail.mcgill.ca, or on socials to learn more and to take part. We're going to be looking at Black racialization and resistance at Elite University. And spoiler alert, the Elite University is McGill, and it's written by a McGill alum. So even if you're not able to attend, it's a really great, really interesting read, and great to celebrate another McGillian as well too. So we're going to shift over, and in the meantime, I'm going to pause the recording. But again, thanks to Kevin, thanks to the audience, and we hope to see you next time, and hope that you spread the word as well too. So yes, virtual round of applause. Wonderful.